The smell of old paper has a way of stopping time. It carries whispers of every hand that ever turned a page, the warmth of curiosity, the breath of someone long gone. When Anna pushed open the oak doors of the Maple Street Library that afternoon, she wasn't searching for ghosts. But sometimes, ghosts find you anyway. Rain tapped softly against the windows as the heavy doors closed behind her. The library was nearly empty, its silence so deep it almost hummed. Dust floated in the golden light slanting through the high windows. Anna brushed droplets of rain from her coat and smiled faintly at the familiar creak of the floorboards. It had been years since she'd last come here. Not since high school. Not since before. Everything changed. "Back again, dear?" Mrs. Holloway, the elderly librarian, looked up from her desk. Her silver hair caught the light like a halo. "Just visiting?" Anna replied, tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "Thought I'd lose myself among the shelves for a while." Mrs. Holloway chuckled softly. "That's what they're for." Anna wandered toward the fiction section, her fingers gliding along the spines of books lined like soldiers in dusty rows. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe a distraction, maybe something that didn't remind her of the empty apartment waiting for her that night. Life had been full of noise lately, the city, her job, her thoughts. But here, in this quiet sanctuary, everything slowed down. Her hand stopped on a worn green book near the end of a shelf. Poems of the Heart, 1946. The gold letters on its spine were faded, almost invisible. When she pulled it free, a faint puff of dust rose like a sigh. The cover was cracked, corners softened by time. She turned the first few pages carefully, afraid they might crumble. And then something slipped loose. A dried flower, fragile, pressed between two yellowed pages, drifted into her hand. It was a violet, perfectly preserved, its purple petals darkened with age. The stem had flattened into the paper like a ghost of itself. Anna froze. There was something heartbreakingly intimate about it. Not just a forgotten keepsake, but a message, a story left unsaid. She looked closer. Beneath the flower, faint pencil marks curved along the margin. "For you, because you always believed in me." No name, no date, just that one quiet sentence. Her heart tightened. She glanced around as if someone might appear and claim it, but the library was silent except for the hum of the radiator. Who had left it here? How long had it been hiding between these pages, waiting to be found? Anna traced the brittle stem with her fingertip, her thoughts tumbling back to another violet, one pressed between notebook pages when she was 17, a memory she had buried so deeply that even her dreams had forgotten its shape, until now. Without realizing it, she whispered aloud, "Could it be?" But she couldn't finish the thought. The room felt heavier now, like the air itself had shifted. She turned the page again, half expecting another note, but there was only a faint stain, perhaps from tears, perhaps from rain. And then she noticed something else. The library card still tucked inside the back cover. Stamped dates trailed back decades. The last signature, written in a steady hand, read, L. Harper, the 12th of May 1973. Anna frowned. Harper, she knew that name. She turned the book over again, staring at it as if it might speak. Could it be the same Harper she once knew? The one she hadn't seen in more than 20 years, the friend who had vanished from her life after that last summer? Her pulse quickened. Maybe it was just coincidence, but maybe not. As thunder rolled softly in the distance, Anna closed the book, holding the pressed violet carefully inside. She didn't know yet why it mattered, or what it wanted her to remember. She only knew that something inside her had shifted, as if the past had just opened its eyes. She looked toward Mrs. Holloway's desk. "Can I borrow this one?" she asked. The librarian smiled. "Of course, dear. That one hasn't been touched in decades." Anna nodded slowly. "Yeah," she murmured half to herself. "I can tell." When she stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something faintly floral, as if the violet in her pocket had carried its scent through time, and just like that, the forgotten friendship began to bloom again. That night, Anna placed the old green book on her kitchen table, beside a cup of untouched tea. The rain had followed her home, drumming softly against the window pane. Street lights shimmered through the glass, painting ripples of gold across the floor. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every heartbeat. She stared at the violet resting between the pages. Something about it made her uneasy, as if she'd stumbled into a private conversation meant for someone else. Still, she couldn't look away. The petals were dry, yet delicate, their edges curling like whispers of a forgotten summer. She turned to the page where she'd found it, page 143, a love poem by an unknown writer. Its title read, "Things We Meant to Say." Anna read the lines aloud, her voice breaking the stillness. Some words were too soft to speak, so we pressed them between days, hoping time would read them for us. Her throat tightened. There was something achingly familiar in those words, not just the poem itself, but the feeling of having once lived it. She reached for the back cover and looked again at the library card. L. Harper, the 12th of May, 1973. That surname pulled at a memory she didn't want to touch. She whispered, almost testing the sound, "Liam Harper." And there it was, the name that had haunted the corners of her mind for years. Liam Harper, her best friend from childhood, the boy who'd lived 2 houses away, the boy who'd left one day without goodbye. They had met in the library too, though that one no longer existed. A smaller building, the Rosewood Public Library, had stood at the edge of their town back in the early 92nds. She was 12, shy, and always reading. He was 13, restless, with the kind of imagination that made ordinary things seem extraordinary. They'd shared summers in the aisles of that little library, whispering jokes between books, daring each other to read the grown-up novels they didn't understand. It was Liam who first gave her a violet. "You keep it," he'd said, grinning, "so you won't forget where to find me." That had been the last summer before his father was transferred to another city. He left one August morning, promising to write. He never did. Anna had told herself she'd moved on. College, work, adulthood, all those years had pressed over that memory like the layers of a closed book. But now, this flower, this very flower, had torn the pages open again. She flipped to the next page in Poems of the Heart. Something fluttered loose, a small folded note, yellowed and thin. Her pulse jumped. It had been tucked deeper, unnoticed before. She unfolded it carefully, revealing faint handwriting in pencil. "For Anna, I left before I could explain. If you ever find this, know that you were never forgotten. Look for me where stories begin again. L." Her breath caught. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. And yet, there it was, her name, written in that same looping script she remembered from their childhood notes. She touched the paper as if to confirm it was real. The kettle whistled on the stove, but she didn't move. Her mind was spinning. Look for me where stories begin again. What did that mean? The library? A metaphor? Or something more literal, a place, perhaps, where he once wrote or read? She turned the book in her hands, scanning the inside cover. In tiny, faded ink, a stamp read, "Property of Rosewood Public Library." Her heart stumbled. That library had been torn down nearly 20 years ago after a fire. So how did this book survive and end up in another town's collection? The thought sent chills down her spine. Maybe someone had saved it. Maybe he had saved it. Anna stood and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The city lights glowed like embers against the wet pavement. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath decades of silence, lay the rest of the story and perhaps the person who once wrote those words. She pressed her palm to the glass. "Where stories begin again," she whispered. Then she turned toward her bookshelf, toward her own unfinished stories, notebooks, drafts, memories she'd been too afraid to finish. Maybe the answer wasn't out there. Maybe it began inside her. Still, she knew one thing. She had to go back to Rosewood. The next morning, the city woke under a pale mist. Anna sat at her kitchen table, the green book open beside her half-finished coffee. The pressed violet lay inside like a fragile compass, pointing her toward something she didn't yet understand. She had barely slept. The words from Liam's note echoed endlessly in her mind. "Look for me where stories begin again." By noon, her decision was made. She called in a day off, packed a small overnight bag, and typed Rosewood into her car's GPS. It had been more than 2 decades since she'd been there, the town where she grew up, the town she'd carefully erased from every conversation about her life. As the miles passed, city towers gave way to long stretches of farmland and soft, rolling hills. The radio murmured forgotten songs, and the windshield wipers beat in rhythm with her heart. Each mile felt like a page turning backward in time. By the time she reached Rosewood, the afternoon sun hung low behind a haze of gray clouds. The town looked smaller, almost shrunken, as if time had quietly folded it in on itself. The corner store was gone. The movie theater now stood boarded up. Yet the same narrow streets and elm trees still whispered like they had when she was a child. Anna parked by the old town square. The air smelled faintly of rain and nostalgia. A small plaque near the fountain caught her eye. "In memory of the Rosewood Public Library. 1908-2001. She walked closer, her shoes clicking against the cobblestone path. The library had once stood just behind that fountain, where now only an empty field remained. Grass and wildflowers covered the ground where shelves had once stood. She crouched, running her fingers through the soil, imagining the countless stories that had turned to ash here. But then she noticed something else. A small wooden bench at the far end of the field, carved with initials. Most were weathered and unreadable, but one pair stood out clearly: AM plus LH. Her breath caught. Her initials, his initials, still here, untouched by time. She sank onto the bench, tracing the carved letters with her fingertips. The memory of that day came rushing back. They were 15, sitting here after closing time, daring each other to leave a mark on the world. "So they'll know we were here," Liam had said, his grin mischievous but sincere. "Stories fade, but names can wait." Anna felt tears sting her eyes. Even then, he had been thinking about memory, permanence, stories. Maybe this was what he meant by where stories begin again. But how could he have known she'd return here after all these years? Unless he'd planned it, left a trail knowing she might one day find it. The wind stirred the grass, and something glimmered near the base of the bench, a small metallic edge, half buried in the dirt. Anna knelt, brushing away the soil. It was a key, old and rusted, tied to a faded blue ribbon. Attached was a tiny paper tag, nearly disintegrated by time. Faded ink revealed only 2 words: North Room. Her pulse quickened. There was no room anymore. The library was gone, reduced to ashes and ghosts, unless something had survived. A hidden section, maybe. A storage annex. The fire had been 20 years ago. She remembered the news, the photos, the smoke. But there had never been any mention of a north room. Clutching the key, Anna stood and looked around. At the far end of the field, behind a row of trees, she saw the faint outline of a foundation wall, charred stones peeking through the grass. She walked toward it slowly. The wall led to what looked like the remnants of a basement door, half buried and sealed by rust. Her heart pounded. The key trembled in her hand. Kneeling, she brushed away dirt and soot. The keyhole was nearly obscured, but she pressed the old key against it anyway. To her shock, it fit. It didn't turn, not yet, but it fit. The world seemed to fall silent around her. Only her breathing, uneven and heavy, filled the air. She looked toward the horizon, where the first drops of rain began to fall again. Lightning flickered faintly in the clouds above the hill. The book, the flower, the note, the initials, they weren't random. They were breadcrumbs. Liam was leading her somewhere, and the next step waited beyond that door. Rain began to fall in earnest, soft at first, then harder, 1,000 tiny fingers drumming across the ruins. Anna stood motionless before the buried door, the key clenched in her hand. Her heart thudded against her ribs, like a fist demanding to be heard. She hesitated only a moment before kneeling again, brushing away wet clumps of earth until the metal keyhole gleamed faintly beneath her flashlight beam. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, "let this still open." The key resisted at first, the old metal groaning, but with a firm twist it gave way. A sound echoed through the field, the slow click of a lock surrendering after 20 years of silence. The door shifted, heavy and reluctant, releasing a puff of air that smelled of ashes and rain-soaked wood. Anna pulled it open just enough to slip inside. The beam of her flashlight sliced through the dark, catching glimpses of broken shelves, soot-covered walls, and stacks of half-melted books that had somehow survived the flames. The space was small, almost like a bunker, brick walls blackened by fire but still standing strong. On one wall, faint letters were painted above a collapsed archway. "North Room." Her knees nearly gave out. It was real. Liam's key had led her straight here. She moved cautiously through the room, each step stirring the smell of old smoke and paper. Her light caught on the remains of a desk at the far end, warped, half-charred, but still upright. Something metallic glinted beneath it. She crouched and reached inside, fingers brushing against a tin box, its lid sealed with a rusted latch. The key turned again, smoother this time, as if it remembered her touch. Inside the box lay a small bundle wrapped in wax paper, a notebook tied with twine, and an envelope yellowed by time. Across the envelope, in handwriting she hadn't seen since childhood, were 2 words: "For Anna." Her breath caught. She sat down on the cold floor, trembling fingers tearing the seal. Inside were several folded sheets, still legible despite the years. She unfolded the first one. "If you've found this, it means the stories survived. Maybe not all of them, but enough. The night the fire started, I was here. I shouldn't have been. I had hidden my notebook behind the north wall because it contained things I wasn't ready to tell anyone, least of all you. But when the smoke came, I couldn't leave it. I tried to save what I could. I didn't make it out." The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. Her hands shook. "Didn't make it out?" She turned to the next page, the handwriting now faint, almost as if fading into the paper itself. "If this reaches you, it means someone saved what I couldn't. Maybe the books, maybe me in some way. You once told me stories never die. They just wait to be found again. So here I am waiting." A sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. She pressed the letter to her chest. The room felt alive with whispers, raindrops pattering on the metal roof, pages rustling in the dark. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard a boy's laughter echo through the walls, that same bright sound from summers long gone. When she opened the notebook, a pressed violet fell into her lap, fresher than the one she'd found in the library book. Its color still deep and gentle. Between the pages were sketches, the old library, the fountain, their carved initials on the bench. And at the bottom of one page, written in pencil, "If stories can find their way back, maybe we can too." Lightning flared outside, and for an instant the entire room glowed, rows of books flickering in silver light, every ruined spine reflecting a fragment of memory. Anna felt the presence of something vast yet tender, as if time itself had paused to let her grieve, to let her remember. She knelt amid the ashes and whispered, "You did make it out, Liam. You're still here." As she spoke, the storm eased. Only the soft drip of water remained, like punctuation at the end of a long-forgotten sentence. She gathered the notebook, the letter, and the violet into her bag. When she turned to leave, the door creaked open wider on its own, welcoming her back to the world above. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, The clouds parted just enough for the sun to spill through, catching the soaked grass in threads of gold. Anna stood there, breathing in the scent of wet earth and burnt paper. She felt lighter, though her heart ached with the weight of rediscovered love and unfinished words. But one thought echoed louder than the rest. If Liam's letters survived, what else might still be waiting to be found? Back at the small inn where she was staying, Anna sat on the edge of the bed, the tin box resting beside her like a fragile heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of rain and iron from the old radiator. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of wet soil, the same smell that used to linger after their childhood storms. She unfolded another sheet of paper from the envelope, the edges trembling in her hands. Liam's handwriting curved across the page with the same careful impatience she remembered, as if every word had to outrun time. The day we carved our initials on the bench, you told me stories were the only thing that could last forever. You said even if we vanished, our stories would wait. I laughed. But you were right. Maybe that's why I started writing everything down, so you'd still hear me, even if I couldn't stay. Anna closed her eyes. She could almost see him there, 13 years old, barefoot, with hair that never stayed down, and a voice that carried through the summer fields. He'd been her first friend, her first secret keeper, the one who made the world seem larger than it was. She read the next page. My father didn't want anyone to know why we really left Rosewood. It wasn't because of his job. It was because of what he found: the plans to tear down the old library, the deal to replace it with a shopping center. He tried to stop them, but people wanted progress. I couldn't stand it either. That library was our world. So before we left, I hid the things that mattered most. The notebooks, the stories, ours. Her pulse quickened. She turned another page. Years later, I came back. I thought maybe I could buy time, protect the place somehow. But it was too late. The night I returned, there was already smoke. I don't know if it was an accident or someone made sure the past couldn't speak again. I tried to save the north room, but the fire spread too fast. If you ever find this, know I didn't run from you, Anna. I ran toward the fire, trying to save what we loved. Her hand flew to her mouth. The words blurred into shapes. She'd always thought Liam had moved away and forgotten her, but he had come back. He'd tried to save their stories and paid for it. The realization hit her like cold rain. The letter she held wasn't just memory. It was a confession, a farewell, a promise kept too late. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she read the final lines. Maybe one day you'll find the book with the violet. I pressed it for you before the fire. It's the last piece that survived. Follow it, and you'll find me not as I was, but as I meant to be remembered. She placed the paper beside the violet, her fingers trembling. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for her breathing. The weight of decades seemed to collapse into that one instant: a boy's love, a girl's loss, a library's ashes, all folding into a single truth. Liam hadn't vanished. His story had been waiting for her all along. When she finally looked up, dawn had begun to touch the window pane with pale light. She hadn't realized how long she'd been sitting there. Outside, the fog was lifting from the hills, and for the first time in years, the world seemed clearer. Anna stood, walked to the small writing desk by the window, and opened her notebook. The first page was blank, empty, like the silence that had filled her life for so long. She began to write. Once, there was a library that burned but never died. Once, there was a friendship that time tried to erase. But words, like flowers, can bloom again even after fire. She smiled faintly through her tears. For years, she had been searching for something to say, something to make sense of everything she'd lost. And now she knew. She wasn't just reading Liam's story, she was finishing it. But as her pen hovered above the page, a thought stopped her one final question she could no longer ignore. If Liam had died in the fire, who had returned the book to the new library? 2 days later, Anna returned to Maple Street Library. The same quiet building where she had first discovered the pressed violet. Morning sunlight streamed through the high windows, scattering over the worn carpet like liquid gold. She carried Liam's notebook, the tin box, and the green poetry book pressed tightly against her chest. Mrs. Holloway was arranging returns on the front counter when she saw her. "Back again, dear?" she asked, with her usual gentle smile. "Yes," Anna said softly. "I think I owe this library a story." Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "Then you've come to the right place. We collect them by the thousands." Anna hesitated, then placed the items carefully on the counter. "Do you know how this book ended up here?" she asked, tapping the faded cover of Poems of the Heart. "It was originally from the Rosewood Library. It burned down years ago." The librarian adjusted her glasses and leaned closer. "Rosewood, you say?" We received a shipment of rescued volumes a few years back. Someone donated them anonymously. Books recovered from the ruins, apparently. Some were nearly destroyed, but a few, like this one, were remarkably intact. The donor never left a name, only a note. Anna's breath caught. A note? Mrs. Holloway opened a small drawer and pulled out an old envelope marked with a fading sticker that read, "Rosewood Transfer." She unfolded the brittle paper inside and handed it to Anna. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. The same looping strokes that had filled the letters from the tin box. For the shelves that still breathe, and the readers who still listen. Some stories wait a lifetime to be heard. Please keep them safe. One of them belongs to someone who will come looking. L.H. Anna's knees nearly gave way. The world tilted for a moment as she reread the initials. "L.H.," she whispered. "Liam Harper." Mrs. Holloway frowned. "Do you know who that was?" Anna nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "He was my best friend. He died in the fire." The librarian's eyes softened. "Then perhaps not entirely, dear." Anna clutched the letter, her heart pounding. The impossible truth began to take shape. The fire had taken Liam's life, but somehow, years later, his handwriting, his donation, his story had found its way here. Either someone had found his notes and carried out his wish, or something deeper, something that couldn't be explained by reason alone, had guided those books back to her. Anna clutched the letter, her heart pounding. The impossible truth began to take shape. The fire had taken Liam's life, but somehow, years later, his handwriting, his donation, his story had found its way here. Either someone had found his notes and carried out his wish, or something deeper, something that couldn't be explained by reason alone, had guided those books back to her. "Would you like to see the archives?" Mrs. Holloway asked suddenly. "We keep donor records, even for anonymous gifts." Weeks passed, but the scent of violets lingered. Sometimes it came when Anna opened a window, sometimes when she turned a page. A subtle, fleeting fragrance like time breathing just over her shoulder. She had returned to the city, but something in her had shifted forever. The apartment that once felt hollow now seemed filled with quiet presence, as though the walls themselves were listening. On her desk sat the green poetry book, its cracked spine carefully repaired, and beside it, the small tin box that had once slept beneath the ashes of the north room. Every morning, before work, she opened the notebook and read a few lines from Liam's letters, not out of sadness, but gratitude. They reminded her that life, even in its silences, carries unfinished conversations. She had also started writing again, not just for herself, but for the stories that never got to finish speaking. The first one she completed she titled, "The Book with the Pressed Flower." It began like this: "There are things that survive fire words, memories, promises. Sometimes they hide in books, sometimes in hearts." Her editor read it weeks later and called her in tears. The story would be published in the library's literary journal, part of a new section devoted to recovered memories. The issue's theme, stories that wait. When she arrived for the reading event, the library looked brighter than she remembered. New lamps glowed above the aisles, and soft music played from hidden speakers. People were laughing, browsing, carrying armfuls of books, the sound of life echoing where once there had been silence. Mrs. Holloway spotted her and waved. "You made it," she said warmly. "They've all been waiting for you." Anna smiled. "No, they've been waiting for him." The librarian tilted her head. "Him?" But Anna only smiled and walked toward the small stage. She took a deep breath, opened her notebook, and began to read aloud. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger, steadier, as though Liam himself were lending her his courage. She read of their summers in the old library, of the carved initials on the bench, of the pressed violet and the fire that couldn't destroy what was meant to endure. When she finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, gentle at first, then swelling into something warm and alive. Someone in the audience asked, "Is the story true?" Anna hesitated, then smiled softly. "All stories are true," she said, "even the ones that only exist to remind us we once loved." That night, after the crowd had left and the lights dimmed, Anna lingered by the shelves. The air was still, the building quiet except for the hum of the heating vents. She slipped the green poetry book back into its place, the same spot where she had found it weeks before. For a moment, her reflection met hers in the glass of the window. Behind her, the shadows of the library stretched long, soft, and peaceful. She reached out, resting her fingers on the spine of the book. "I kept my promise," she whispered. The overhead light flickered once, just faintly, not enough to startle her, but enough to make her pause. Then came a whisper of cool air, like a page turning itself. And as she stepped outside, she noticed something she hadn't before. The small garden by the entrance, where volunteers had recently planted wildflowers. In the center of it, glowing softly under the lamplight, bloomed a single violet. Anna knelt beside it, smiling through tears. "You found your way back," she murmured. She stayed there for a long while, the evening air wrapping around her like an old friend. The stars emerged one by one, quiet witnesses to a story that had waited 70 years to be told. When she finally rose to leave, she looked back once more at the library, a place reborn, a promise fulfilled. And somewhere, beyond what eyes can see, a boy's voice echoed faintly through the shelves. "You see, stories never die, Anna. They just wait for someone to listen." She smiled. "I'm listening," she whispered. Then she turned toward the night, her footsteps light, the scent of violets following her into forever. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and memories. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss more forgotten stories that echo through time. Because sometimes the past isn't gone, it's just waiting to be found again.